Hello, I am Jessica. Have you ever noticed that after 60, even when you are the same man inside, people begin to look at you differently? Sometimes with respect, sometimes with distance, and sometimes with complete emotional silence. And have you ever wondered what changes in a woman's perception that makes her either feel drawn toward a man or slowly emotionally step back without even saying it? Because the truth is, it is not age that changes attraction. It is energy, behavior, and emotional presence. And in the next moments, I'm going to explain something very important. Something simple you can do just once that can quietly change how a woman sees you, not as someone trying to be noticed, but as someone who is naturally felt in the room. After 60, life becomes less about proving and more about presence. But many men unknowingly carry old habits into this stage of life. They try to speak more to be valued, explain more to be understood, and sometimes even chase attention in subtle ways without realizing it. But female psychology at this stage of life is not focused on noise. It becomes highly sensitive to emotional stability. A woman is no longer looking for the most impressive man in the room. She is observing the most emotionally grounded one, the man who does not rush to fill silence, the man who does not seek validation in every sentence, the man who is comfortable in his own quietness. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because when a man reaches a point where he stops trying to prove his value and instead begins to simply carry his value quietly, something interesting happens in how women respond to him. It is not immediate attraction in a loud way. It is something softer, deeper. It is recognition. And recognition is far more powerful than attention. Now, before I explain the one thing you should do, let me make something very clear. This is not about pretending. It is not about acting differently. It is about removing something, not adding something. Because most men do not lose attraction because they are lacking something. They lose it because they are doing too much. They talk too much when silence would create more presence. They explain too much when mystery would create more respect. They try too hard to be liked when simply being calm would naturally create connection. And over time, this creates a subtle emotional imbalance in how they are perceived. Now listen carefully to this one idea, because this is the core of everything. If you are 60 or older, do this once and do it fully without forcing anything afterward. In your next interaction with a woman, whether she is a friend, a family connection, or someone you are emotionally close to, do not try to lead the conversation with words. Instead, lead it with presence. That means something very simple. Speak less than you normally would, but mean more with every word you say. Pause before you respond. Let silence exist without rushing to fix it. And most importantly, stop trying to fill emotional space that does not need to be filled. At first, this may feel uncomfortable because most men are trained to believe that connection comes from communication. But emotional connection after 60 works differently. It comes from how safe someone feels in your presence, not how entertained they are by your conversation. Let me tell you a small story so you can understand this more deeply. There was a man named Harold, 67 years old. After retirement, Harold felt something he could not easily explain. People were polite to him, but conversations never lasted long. Even when he tried to be warm and engaging, something felt missing. He began to feel invisible in moments where he used to feel important. One day, he met a woman named Clara at a small community gathering. Harold did what he always did. He tried to be engaging. He asked questions, he shared stories, he filled every silence with effort. But Clara responded politely and distantly. Then something changed. Halfway through the conversation, Harold stopped trying. Not because he was angry or discouraged, but simply because he became tired of forcing the moment. He leaned back slightly, listened more, and began responding only when he truly felt like speaking. He stopped chasing the flow of the conversation and allowed it to move naturally. And something unexpected happened. Clara started to change her behavior. She slowed down. She started pausing more before speaking. She began to look at him differently, not because he became louder or more impressive, but because he became calm. At one point, Clara said something quietly that stayed with Harold for a long time. She said, "You feel different, like you are not trying to impress me." Harold did not reply immediately. He just smiled slightly. And in that moment, the dynamic between them shifted completely. Now listen carefully to what actually happened here, because this is the psychology behind it. Clara did not suddenly like Harold because he became a different person. She responded differently because he stopped displaying nervous energy. He stopped over-explaining. He stopped filling space. And in female psychology, especially in mature relationships, calm presence is interpreted as emotional safety. When a man is constantly trying to prove himself, the energy becomes slightly unstable. Even if the words are right, the feeling is restless. But when a man becomes comfortable in silence, when he stops chasing approval, the emotional system of the other person relaxes. And when a woman feels relaxed around a man, she does not feel pressured. She feels safe to be herself. And that is the point where she begins to see him differently, not as someone trying to be valued, but as someone who already values himself. This is why the one thing you must do is not a technique, not a phrase, and not a trick. It is a shift in behavior. Remove urgency from your presence. Do not rush your words. Do not rush your reactions. Do not rush to be understood. Let people come to you in the conversation instead of you constantly going toward them emotionally. And when you do this, something subtle but powerful happens. Women begin to mirror your emotional pace. If you are calm, they become calm. If you are grounded, they soften. If you are present without pressure, they begin to open up naturally. Now, this does not mean you become silent or detached. It means you become intentional. You speak when it adds value, not when it feels discomfort. You listen not to respond, but to understand. And you stop treating silence as a problem. Because in reality, silence is not empty. Silence reveals confidence. Most men never realize that after 60, attraction is no longer built on performance. It is built on emotional ease. And emotional ease is created when you stop trying to control how you are perceived. Let me explain this even more clearly. When a woman feels that a man needs her approval, she becomes careful. She becomes observant. But when she feels that a man is already stable within himself, she becomes open. She does not feel responsible for his emotional state. She does not feel pressure to respond in a certain way. She simply exists more naturally around him. And that natural ease is what creates deeper connection. So if you remember only one thing from this entire message, remember this. Do not try to become more impressive. Become more emotionally still, because stillness is not emptiness. It is presence without noise. And now, before we end, I want to leave you with a final reflection. At this stage of life, love is no longer about winning attention. It is about creating comfort. It is about being someone whose presence does not create pressure, but peace. Someone who does not need to be constantly understood, because he is already grounded in who he is. And when a woman experiences that kind of man, even once, she does not just see him differently. She remembers how he made her feel. After that moment, when a man begins to understand the power of calm presence, something even deeper starts to unfold in his life. Because the real transformation is not how women respond for a few minutes, it is how the entire emotional pattern around him begins to change over time. But there is a second truth here that most men never realize after 60. It is not only about speaking less, it is about what you stop chasing internally. Because even when the mouth is quiet, the mind can still be loud. Many men after 60 physically slow down, but emotionally they still carry the old habit of seeking approval. They still want to be seen as interesting, still want to be appreciated, still want to feel needed in conversation. And this silent desire creates energy that women can feel instantly, even if nothing is said. Female psychology is highly sensitive to emotional intention, not just behavior. A woman may not always understand what she feels in words, but she always feels it in energy. And this is where the deeper shift happens. When a man becomes emotionally still, not only in action, but also in intention, something subtle changes in how he is received. He is no longer evaluated in the same way. He becomes felt. And being felt is very different from being judged. Let me tell you another small story so this becomes clear. There was another man named Thomas, 71 years old. Thomas was different from Harold. He was quieter, more careful, more controlled in conversation. On the surface, he already spoke less than most people his age, but inside, he was still searching. Every time he spoke to someone, especially women, there was a hidden pressure in him, a need for the conversation to go well, a need to be liked, a need to not be ignored. And even though he was polite and respectful, people often kept interactions short with him. He could not understand why. One day, during a family gathering, he met a woman named Elena, a family friend. At first, everything seemed normal. Thomas spoke gently, asked questions, behaved appropriately, but internally, he was still slightly tense. Then something shifted during a simple moment. Elena mentioned something emotional about her life, and instead of trying to respond perfectly or impress her with the right words, Thomas did something different. He paused. Not a dramatic pause, just a real one. And in that pause, he stopped trying to fix the moment. He simply said, "That must have been difficult for you." Nothing more. No extra explanation, no advice, no performance, just presence. And something unexpected happened. Elena stopped speaking for a moment, and then she nodded slowly. Her expression softened, and instead of continuing the conversation in a formal way, she began speaking more openly, more personally, more emotionally. Later, she said something that stayed with Thomas. She said, "You don't rush to fill space. That feels rare." Now, this is the important part. Thomas had not changed his personality. He had not become more attractive, more funny, or more intelligent in that moment. He simply stopped performing emotional usefulness. And in female psychology, especially at a mature level of life, emotional safety is not created by answers. It is created by space. When a woman feels she is not being rushed, corrected, or managed in a conversation, she naturally begins to open up deeper layers of herself. But when she feels subtle pressure to respond, pressure to match energy, pressure to keep the interaction alive, she unconsciously starts to withdraw. This is not conscious behavior. It is emotional instinct. And this instinct becomes even stronger with age because both men and women become more sensitive to emotional authenticity after 60. Now let's connect this back to your transformation. Earlier, we spoke about speaking less and leading with presence. But now we go one level deeper. You must also stop trying to emotionally do something in every interaction. Sometimes your presence is enough. Sometimes your silence is the most powerful response. Sometimes your calm attention says more than advice ever could. And when a man reaches that stage, women begin to feel something very specific around him. They feel, this man is not trying to take anything from this moment. And that feeling creates trust, not excitement, not attraction, but trust. And trust is what slowly builds deeper emotional connection. Now, there is a third layer to this shift, and it is very important. After 60, many men lose influence in conversations not because they are ignored, but because they over-participate emotionally. They try to fix moods. They try to correct misunderstandings too quickly. They try to guide the emotional tone of every interaction. But when a man stops doing this, something interesting happens. He becomes more anchored in the eyes of others. People start adjusting to him instead of him adjusting to them. And this is where respect naturally begins to rise. Not because he demands it, but because he no longer leaks emotional urgency. Let me explain this simply. When you need a reaction from someone, you lower your emotional position. When you are comfortable without a reaction, you stay grounded. And human psychology always responds to grounded energy with more respect over time. So if you want to continue this transformation, remember this. You are not trying to become more interesting. You are becoming less reactive. You are not trying to impress. You are learning to hold emotional space without effort. And that is something most people only understand later in life, if they ever do. Now, before we continue to the final part of this video, I want you to reflect on something very quietly. Think about your recent conversations. Did you speak to connect? Or did you speak to avoid silence? Did you respond to understand or to be acknowledged? Because the difference between those two is exactly where emotional perception is formed. And once you see that difference clearly, you cannot unsee it. In the final part, we will bring everything together. How this one shift not only changes how women see you, but how your entire emotional world begins to respond differently to your presence. If this message resonated with you, then stay connected to this space, because here we talk about the real emotional truths that most people feel but never say out loud. And sometimes, understanding these small shifts in behavior is enough to change the way life responds to you. Take care and stay steady.